And are you aware of the fact that based on the study that resulted in the showing of the location of the president and the government we've just seen before, that this is the conclusion of the line that the bullet was following when it struck the president, that the House committee reached? Do you know that? This is what they concluded. Is that correct?
That's what they true. Yes, I'm aware of
that.
that.
The House committee concluded that.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to have to just conclude by putting a couple of exhibits in here. I'd like the exhibit number 100, please. This is an extremely poor picture. Unfortunately, we tried to get the original pictures from the archives, and we're not able to do so. Would you give this to Dr. Weck, please? But let me indicate what is shown here. This has already been shown, I think. This is a Zapruder film. It's frame 210 up here on the left. The one on the right shows the position of the limousine that was used in the Warren Commission reenactment, corresponding to the Zapruder frame 210. And the picture in the lower left here is what the assassin would have seen from the window. Now, when this was explained before, it was a little confusing, I think. Certainly, there was nobody up there taking pictures at the time the shots were fired, but these pictures were taken by the FBI during the Warren Commission reenactment. If you look at that picture closely, the crosshairs, it was taken through the crosshairs of the telescopic sight. And it comes right in on the president's back, does it not, Dr. Weck?
Yes.
And if you look right in front of the president, you'll see Governor Connolly turn sharply to his right.
No, sir, that's not correct.
It's not correct.
He's not.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do.
He's not right in front of the president. He's to the left. He's in front and to the left.
Right. If Governor Connolly was sitting in the position as shown in this picture, the bullet could have gone through the president and into Governor Connolly's right armpit.
No, sir, not into the right posterior axillary. Even with this reenactment, if you draw the straight line, you'll see that it is to the left of the right armpit.
What I want to do is put this so that you all can see this, the jury can see this. I want to put it down here. Actually, I'll pass it around. So if Dr. Biden would get that picture and give it to the jury and pass it around so they can look at it, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, one more question, right?
Would you show Dr. Weck this picture? We don't have this picture. We got it too late from the archives to put it on the materials here. And I'll ask you to look at that picture, Dr. Weck, and ask you if it shows, I'll represent to you that it shows our inspector with a rod passing close to the president's body and into Governor Connolly's back that was taken immediately after the reenactment in a garage. And just to ask you the question, the judge has allowed me one more question. If the position of the men had been in that, if the men had been in that position, then the bullet could have gone through the president and hit the governor, could it not?
Gone through the president, hit the governor?
That's the question,
yes.
Dr. Weck, that's the question.
The answer is yes, that's right.
Thank you.
I hope so.
I want to put two things in. I want to put two things in evidence, if I may, Your Honor. Exhibit 130.
Thank you.
Just pass those around if you would, Dr. Biden. I'd appreciate it. Exhibit 130 represents his findings, summary of the findings of the photographic evidence panel, and I'll place these out here so that the jury can examine them later, and also 129, which they're going to have to speak for themselves at this point because the judge is going to make me sit down, but let me summarily tell you what they show. They show that the president was leaning forward at the time that he was hit between 11 and 18 degrees relative to a line perpendicular to the road. That the road had a downward slope of 3 degrees and that adjusting the entrance and exit wounds in the president's body to conform with the position that he was in, there was a downward slope through the president's body of 4 degrees. That is to say that the wound in the back was higher than the wound in the front. So we have a downward slope of 4 degrees. Dr. Weck has talked about an upward slope, but the findings of the photographic panel here are that there was a downward slope through the president's body of 4 degrees, a downward slope on the road of 3 degrees, which is 10 degrees, and a downward slope, a forward slope, and the president leaning forward from 11 to 18 degrees, which gives us a relationship of 18 to 25 degrees of the president with respect to the trajectory, and the trajectory itself was 21 degrees, so it falls right within the middle. I'm sorry that I ran out of time, but I got involved with the head wound, and I didn't really intend to do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Liebler, and thank you, Dr. Weck, very much for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll give you one question to redirect. That's all I can give you. We're really short of time.
Dr. Weck, did Dr. Sturtevant do any tests to establish that CD399 could have been the super bullet?
Could have been what?
The super bullet that did the single bullet theory?
No, to my knowledge, he did not.
Dr. Blakey began with a short introductory statement. Mr. Liebler will then be given approximately 15 minutes to discuss the acoustics evidence. Dr. Blakely will be given the same, and then we'll have Mr. Liebler return with a short closing statement. So first, the court's going to recognize Dr. Blakey to give some foundation information about the acoustics evidence.
This is like 50 seconds on the acoustics. Let me set it up in the following way. This is Dealey Plaza. You've seen it to the point of nausea. This is Maine, Houston, and Elm. This is a representation of 3 shots from the depository. The basic argument turns on whether there's a shot from this area coming this direction, from the grassy knoll. I'm going to talk to you later about certain events, and what I want to do is point to you in the places where they are. This is the area where Bill and Gail Newman were standing. I want to turn it on. This is the area where S.M. Holland was standing. You will see in the film from time to time a police officer by the name of H.B. McLean come around this point, and you'll see him coming here, you'll see him turning, and you'll see him ultimately here. The problem, if you will, in the acoustics is that we were told on the committee that the Dallas PD tape was captured during the period of the assassination. Conspiracy theorists thought that what this was an effort to block the communications channel. Well, if the tape was running during the time of the assassination, this gave us a chance to get a recording of the assassination. So we went out and made an effort to find the tape recording. The tape recording turns out to be 2 dictabelts and a tape. We sent the 2 dictabelts and a tape up to Bolt, Brannick, and Newman in Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Give me a little qualification for them. They did the work on the Zerika's missing tape, the time on the Nixon's tape. They also did the study of Kent State, where the officer was who shot the students. And they were recommended to us, and they were #1, the Acoustical Society of America, to come in and look at it. What they did is they analyzed the tape, and they came up and they said, and this is a gross oversimplification, that there were 5 areas on the tape that they thought might be gunshots. But the only way they could tell us whether they were or not is if we went down to the plaza and fired rifles in the plaza, so we'd have something to match it off against. The difficulty for us is we didn't know where the motorcycle was. We knew where the possible locations of the gunshots were, but we did not know where the motorcycle was. So we reconstructed a test. And what we did is we set microphones every 18 feet along this line in order to get shots. Unfortunately, this builds into our ability to match a plus or minus 18. We took the matches out. We came up with a match, a series of matches. The only match that, for present purposes, that counts as the shot from the grassy knoll. It turns out to be a probability of 50-50. We then went into phase 2 of the study, and we made an effort to do an analytical reconstruction of the shot from the grassy knoll to see if we could increase the degree of confidence in it. This is basically the wave-formed sounds of a shot. What this represents is a graph that gives you two things, amplitude in this direction and time in this direction. When a shot occurs, what we hear is this. What actually occurs is this. That can be represented in this. Assuming a shot from the grassy knoll, you have a direct, and it's a supersonic shot. You have a supersonic shock wave going directly from it to the microphone. You then have a muzzle blast going directly from the gun to the microphone. You then have echoes off principal locations. And what you end up doing is, if you know the temperature of the air and the speed of sound, you get a relatively fixed range within which these distances can be measured out. And that's precisely what this is an effort to do. This is the shot allegedly from the grassy knoll. You can see in the front here it has an indication of an N wave, meaning there was a supersonic passage through the air before the bullet muzzle blast arrived. This is the muzzle blast, and these are echoes. And you can identify in these, or at least our people thought they could identify, the physical features in Dealey Plaza that was represented by this. And they were able to do that because we actually had fired shots in Dealey Plaza, and we knew what the echo structure of those shots were. And the question is, how close a match could we get from the echo structure on the tape against our own shots? The conclusion in 1979 was that this represented, to a 95 degree of confidence, now understand that's a 5% degree of lack of confidence, a shot from the grassy knoll. We asked the NSF panel, or we asked the Department of Justice to ask that further studies be done on this, because obviously we were running out of time and money, and if we were not a congressional committee but a scientific body, we would have done considerably more study. We asked the Department of Justice to take a look at it, and I think what we'll hear now from Professor Liebler is what he thinks the NSF panel showed.
The House committee concluded that certain impulse patterns in the waveforms made of this Dallas police recording from the open microphone on the motorcycle represented shots fired during the assassination, as Professor Blakey has just told you. There were no sounds. We have the tape here, and I'm going to play it for you, parts of it. I'll play the whole thing if you want to hear it. The tape, there was no sound whatever on the tape that even remotely resembles shots. The House committee's explanation is that the Dallas police radio equipment, designed primarily for voice transmission, would not faithfully record the sound of such a loud and intrusive event as a gunshot. James C. Bowles, of whom more in a moment, who was the Dallas Police Department officer in charge of the dispatchers at the time of the assassination and is presently sheriff of Dallas County, Texas, would testify, if here, that the Dallas Police Department radio system in place in 1963 would have recorded the sounds of the shots, not just these inaudible waveforms. They're not. There's something on the tape that is translated by Blakey's experts into waveforms of the type that he showed you. But there's nothing on the tape relating to them, or even not relating to them, that sounds like shots. Bowles would testify that the equipment in use in 1963 would have recorded the sounds of the shots if they had been fired within 300 feet of the open mic, which is absolutely essential for their theory. The microphone had to be that close. They say that it was closer. He would testify the sound recorded on the police department tape would have been quite similar to the same sound that would be heard over a regular telephone equipment. So when you think about this, just imagine somebody firing a shot at the other end of a telephone line and asking yourself what you would hear. You certainly wouldn't hear anything like what appears on this tape that Professor Blakey wants us to believe are shots. In addition to that, Bowles would testify that during the reconstruction that Blakey just described to us, when all these test firings were made, Dallas Police Department equipment that was similar to that which was in use in 1963 clearly received the sound of all test shots and recorded them audibly and easily recognizable as shots. And that's a quote from Bowles. Why are there no sounds of shots on the tape? The answer is simple. Because the microphone was not in Dealey Plaza. It was not in any place where it could have received sounds of shots fired at the time of the assassination. All of the fancy graphs and technical conversation that Bob Blakey is going to give us today, to the contrary notwithstanding. This was not a minor problem, and it was raised at the time. Sheriff Bowles tried to get the House committee to focus specifically on the question of where this motorcycle was, but it was never really done. After they had done this acoustical test, they had to go out and find a motorcycle. They had some pictures that showed lots of motorcycles in the plaza. They picked this poor guy McLean and claimed that his microphone was open. They brought McLean back to Washington and took his testimony, and you ought to read it. It's very interesting. The only thing they ever asked him was whether he thought his microphone was open. They never asked him that. When he went back to Dallas and found out what the House committee was proposing to do with his testimony, he immediately announced that it was not possible for his microphone to have been open, and he was not the motorcycle officer who recorded these sounds. Passing over the problem that there's nothing that sounds like shots on the tape, the House committee conclusion cannot stand, obviously, unless the motorcycle with the open microphone was in Dealey Plaza when the shots were fired. And two, the impulse patterns were recorded at the time the shots were fired. And Mr. Blakey and my colleagues on the other side of this case have got the burden of proof on both those questions.
Were you there in 82?
I was there.
Were you there in 82?
I was there for the catch.
Oh, it was a mess. It was an absolute mess.
Well, wait till today.
When he caught the pass,
next week.
When he caught the pass, I was in the press box, and I almost got very.
Runs pretty constantly, and it sounds, if you listen to it, like it's running at about, Bowles estimates, 25 to 30 miles an hour. Well, during this time, McLean's motorcycle was in the motorcade, which was moving down Main Street in Dallas, where the crowds were pressing in on the motorcade from both sides. The motorcade was going on an average speed of 2 to 4 miles an hour during that period of time, actually stopped at least 3 or 4 times, and the crowd was screaming and yelling, and you can hear all those noises in the Channel 2 tape. There's 2 tapes here, okay? The Channel 1 tape, where the microphone was stuck open, and the Channel 2 tape that was used by the motorcade, and there were lots of transcriptions or transmissions from Chief Curry's car, which was in the motorcade, and when Chief Curry, on Channel 2, and when Chief Curry talks, when the motorcade is going down Main Street in Dallas from inside of his car, you can hear the sounds of the crowd yelling and screaming along the side. And if I hadn't already taken so much time, and if the judge weren't glaring at me like he is, I'd play that for you, but I'll pass over that, and you accept my word for it for the moment. But if you don't want to accept my word for it, it's on the tape, and I'll play it for you later, hopefully on Professor Blakey's time. Now, after the engine noise subsides, we have some loud clicks and pops for about 10 seconds. And these are what Bob Blakey believes are gunshots, even though they sound more like static. Most importantly, from the timing standpoint, which is what I want to address first, is that these shots, the fourth one, was accompanied by an audible, and this was known by the House acoustic experts, by an audible but not intelligible, was unintelligible, nobody could figure out what the voice said, that was laid in there at the same time at 145 seconds into the tape, which was the time of the fourth shot, according to the House committee. There's this voice in the background, but nobody can figure out what it was. Now, what I'm going to do first is just play this tape starting at about 100 seconds into the tape. The motorcycle slows a bit later, and then when the counter gets to the point where the House committee shots start, I'll raise my hand, and you can listen for the shots, and when the shot time period is over, I'll drop it. So that's when the shot period ends. That's the motorcycle. Going 2 to 4 miles an hour in the motorcade. Listen to it. It'll slow in a few seconds. It's starting to slow. Here's the shots. The shots are over. You can see there are other cracks and snaps and popples in there as it goes along. Focusing first on the timing question, an amateur musician, a whole study was made of this House effort by a committee of experts appointed by the National Academy of Sciences at the first of the House Committee, then of the Justice Department. An amateur musician in Mansfield, Ohio, by the name of Steve Barber, was listening to this tape on a little plastic disc that he got in a Rolling Stone magazine or some such thing. And he said that he could hear this unintelligible voice that I mentioned that came right at this time of the last shot, 145 seconds. Barber said he could hear the words, "hold everything." And he wrote to Norman Ramsey, who was in the Harvard University Physics Department, suggesting that the words hold everything were in there. And Barber suggested that those words, "hold everything," were part of a transmission that came over Channel 2, in which the Sheriff Decker, was telling his men to run over to the school book depository and to the railroad tracks and to hold everything secure until the homicide investigators could get there. That created a problem, because that transmission was made by Sheriff Decker 64 seconds after Chief Curry of the Dallas Police Department had ordered the motorcade to go to Parkland Hospital following the assassination. If that piece of evidence held up, it would turn out that these noises that the House Committee believed were shots were recorded over a minute after the assassination had ended and the motorcade was on its way to Parkland Hospital. So this is called the Ballistics Acoustics Committee. We'll call it the BAC, okay? The BAC did a voice print of the segment from Sheriff Decker, "hold everything secure," and a voice print of the 145-second segment, and compared them. And this is not just an ordinary voice print situation where I might say something today and an expert could tell it was my voice if I said something else tomorrow. These are two identical transmissions. The same voice, the same frequencies, the same times, and they match like a hand in a glove. Okay? And even BBN, Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, the firm of consultants in Boston that did this work, admits that this match is an accurate and correct match. They do not deny that the hold everything at the 145-second point on Channel 1, which is the end of Blakey's shots, and the Sheriff Decker communication that occurred a minute after the motorcade went to Parkland Hospital are the same transmissions. They are the identical transmissions. Now, in all fairness, they do not admit that proves that the tape, that the transmission was a minute later, because for reasons that I do not know. But they have, in a letter that Professor Blakey kindly gave me, Jim Barger, the chief scientist of this organization, says that there are anomalies or something in the tape to make him suspect that this may not, in fact, show that the timing question is off, but there's no question that it is the same transmission. And the unanimous Ballistics Acoustics Committee, plus a special segment of it that did a study for IBM, is absolutely convinced conclusively that these noises that Blakey is talking about occurred more than 1 minute after the motorcade had already left for the hospital. Now, the question of where the motorcycle was. McLean, who's driving this big Harley Davidson down Main Street with the motorcade, absolutely categorically denies that this could have been his motorcycle. He testified that he was parked on Houston Street, and if you come up there and look, there's a little pergola back there, some open brickwork in the very back there at the corner of Main Street and Houston Street. Get this thing off. I'll go over there and show it to you because it's worth it. McLean says that he was sitting right here on Houston Street when he heard the shot. He only heard one shot, and the pigeons flew up from the Texas School Book Depository building. He didn't move. He sat there and said that he looked down through these windows here and saw the Secret Service agent jumping up on the back of the presidential limousine. That was after the third shot was fired. McLean was still back here on Houston Street. In order for this to have been McLean's motorcycle that was recording these noises, the microphones that produced the match are way up here in the intersection of Houston Street and Elm Street. So that suggests in itself that this was not McLean's motorcycle. I've lost the microphone entirely at this point. Where'd it go to? Here it is. But there's more than that. In fact, there's two main points. The first is that the sounds we've already heard, and I've got to move to another tape segment here, so I'm going to move back to it as I talk. Sit down, Blakey.
I'll give him 2 minutes more.
Did he have at least only 2 more minutes of my time?
All right.
That's close enough. I'll start in a minute. There's two basic points here. The first is that the motorcycle, the noise on the tape at the beginning, when the motorcycle is supposedly coming down Main Street, is not consistent with the sounds that were heard at that time, because the motorcycle engine is going too fast and there are no crowd noises. But that's not the important point. The important point is that after the assassination, the entire motorcade, including McLean, whose motorcycle was supposed to be open and recording these sounds, took off for Parkland Hospital, full bore in a Harley-Davidson police special with sirens blaring. The whole motorcade had sirens blaring. There's no sound on the tape of sirens whatsoever at this point. There is no sound of a motorcycle engine speeding up. In fact, you can hear a motorcycle engine idling. You can hear people whistling in the background. You can hear a noise, bonk, bonk. It sounds like a motorcycle running over a grate, over a drain grate, which was present at the Trade Mart, where this motorcycle that was recording these events actually was. There is not the faintest notion in that tape that this microphone is with a motorcade moving to Parkland Hospital. 2 minutes after the motorcade leaves Dealey Plaza, we do hear sirens, and I'll just play the tape so you can hear it and draw your own conclusions. That way I can make Blakey sit down as well. I have two advantages. The motorcade has already left. The motorcade, according to the ballistics acoustics finding, is on its way to Dealey Plaza. We still have this motorcycle running along. What we're going to hear, you'll hear it. You're going to hear sound of sirens. And you'll hear them faintly at first, and then they'll rise and get louder, reach a peak, and then fade away, as though this motorcycle is going by the microphone, and the microphone is sitting still. The microphone was on a motorcycle parked at the Trade Mart, which was about halfway between Dealey Plaza and Parkland Hospital. The motorcade went right by the Trade Mart on its way to Parkland Hospital. Still got a bit to go. Do you hear a Harley-Davidson police special roaring off to Parkland Hospital in this tape? You hear any siren noises? On Channel 2, you can hear the sirens clearly in the police chief's car. Bonk, bonk. Those noises are other people trying to key in. hear the engine speed up and then slow down and idle. Practically no engine noise at all. Hear the sirens coming. Series of sirens. 3 waves of sirens. The motorcade goes by. The motorcyclists park right there in the parking lot at the trademark.
All right, Professor, about 2 seconds. That's
Yes,
it.
I have a letter in my hand that Robert Blakey wrote to James Barger on November 30th, 1981, 2 years after he completed this investigation, and he says, one other thing occurred to me about time. If I recall correctly, you indicated once that you could hear the motor of the motorcycle and that it might be possible, analyzing its sound, to estimate its speed at various points in time, or at least to tell when it changed speed. We know from McLean's testimony and the photos that he speeded up on Houston, slowed down at the turn, went about 10 miles an hour down Elm Street, and then raced to Parkland. Should not this sequence show up on the tape? Indeed, Professor Blakey, it should. The problem is, it doesn't. Thank you.
All right, I will give Professor Blakey equal time to finish his remarks.
We not get an unlimited opportunity to talk.
God, no. I mean, we're not that...
Until I say it's enough. Go ahead.
Let me show you, if I can, the basic position of the NSF panel. This is channel 2 and this is channel 1. Channel 2 is the Curry's, the chief's broadcasts. Channel 1 were the police officers. Right about here on channel 1 is where the 4 shots occur. And under approximately the 3rd to 4th shot, Decker makes the comment, and this is now Sheriff Bill Decker makes a comment, hold everything. Steve Barber was able to figure out that if you looked over on channel 1 and channel 2, Decker is in the same place. Accordingly, since Curry made a comment, let's go to the hospital, about 60 seconds before Decker, if these 2 things are identical, these are the 2 central propositions. If these 2 things are identical and, underline the word and, italicize the word and, simultaneously recorded, then the events that we analyzed, the 4 events, occurred 60 seconds after the assassination, and therefore, whatever they are, they're not the sounds of the assassination. There is another coordination that can be done with this tape, and one of the things that Jim didn't do is explore whether there's other crosstalk on here. And I am not necessarily asserting that I believe this. I'm simply presenting to you an alternative view. Gary Mack, a researcher, made an alternative analysis of it, and he does it with Bella. It turns out that there's another place on both the tapes where Sergeant S.Q. Bella says, do you want, etc. And it is perfectly clear that this is the same. My assumption would be is if we did a spectrographic analysis, we'd get it. If you coordinate Bella back, you put Decker in the last shot before Curry. What you now have to choose is between which coordination you're going to accept. If the Bella one is correct, then the Decker one here and the Decker one there were not simultaneously recorded. And if they were not simultaneously recorded, one of the 2 essential positions in Jim's analysis that this is not the sound of the assassination is gone. How do we figure out in the absence of additional scientific study? One of the things that really bothered me about the NSF panel is I've read scientific studies all my life, and every single one of them always ended up with the recommendation of additional study. This one recommends the following. We have conclusive evidence that Decker is the same. We think it is likely, not conclusive, that they were simultaneously recorded. Therefore, we conclude conclusively. We drop a footnote. Go back to logic. You cannot get greater certainty in a conclusion than you have in a premise. If the premise of simultaneous recording is only likely, then the only grounds on which they can sustain their position is likely, not conclusive. But in any event, they conclude because it is not likely that additional studies would change the result they recommend against them as not worth it. Now, a judgment of whether something is worth it or not is a judgment about values, and science speaks to facts, not values, at least since David Hume. What you got was a political judgment in this particular body on whether it was worthwhile doing additional studies. My own judgment is it is worthwhile doing additional studies. In the absence of additional studies, how can this jury choose between the analysis of the select committee that says these 4 events are the signs of the assassination and the conclusion of the NSF panel is that these are admittedly non-random events, but events that occurred somewhere else? I suggest to you that the only way in which you can do that is exactly the way you do attest any other witness's credibility. You look for corroboration. If the scenario of the acoustics is corroborated substantially, it becomes therefore believable. And this is where I now raise with you the following. Jim and the NSF panel would have you believe that those 4 events that occurred 6 minutes after the assassination and are unique to this tape randomly matched the sounds of the assassination as to timing and direction. Now, let me kind of call back for you and go to the lecture at lunch. Remember, I suggested we have 2 clocks here, the clock of the film and the clock of the tape. If the clock of the film and the clock of the tape are coordinate, they corroborate one another. And for 2 of the events on the tape, we have immediate and direct corroboration in the film. The shot from behind that hits the president, the shot from behind that hits the president, shot number 2, shot number 3. Timing and direction of the film plus the autopsy is exactly the timing and direction on the acoustics. The one is about 5 seconds, the other one is about 6 seconds. Understand the timing on the film is based on the average running of that camera, and the time on the tape is based on a reconstruction based on the electrical hums in it. So I got 2 corroborations, timing and direction in the film, autopsy, and the tape. I've got a 3rd one. Remember I suggested Governor Conley's testimony? He said he turned around and he wasn't hit by the first shot. Well, indeed, we looked back in the film based on where the acoustics told us to look, and you can see Governor Conley turning around. We can see that little girl across the street. I'm not going to suggest to you that that's the kind of corroboration that's represented by shots 2 and 4, but as to shots 1, it is consistent. Now turn to the question of the shot from the grassy knoll. Is there corroboration for the shot from the grassy knoll? In the film? No. In the autopsy? No. In none of the other physical evidence is there any corroboration for it. On the other hand, it is not uncorroborated. I gave you the statistics of the witnesses, 250 people in the plaza. 20 heard shots from the grassy knoll. This is not something that stands only on the acoustics. It stands on the people who said it was there. I've reviewed for you, and you can take it home and look at it, and you can go read the original testimony. We have testimony of witnesses. Bill and Gail Newman, one to the left, one over their head. Zapruder standing with the film. One could have been anywhere, but the other one was all around me and was different. We've got S.M. Holland. Remember I told you to remember S.M. Holland? Standing on the overpass, looking down. He gives you a scenario. Eyewitness, ear witness. Precisely the timing and direction of the acoustics, and his testimony is corroborated by everything that the Warren Commission did on to how many shots from which direction. They say 2 from behind. We say 2 from behind. They say this 2 from behind. We say exactly the same 2 from behind. We don't disagree. The disagreement comes on when the first one occurs and whether there's one from the grassy knoll. But look what you have to accept his analysis. You have to reject all 4, not just the one from the grassy knoll. And if you buy 3 of them as corroborated, you're backed into buying the 4th one as corroborated. Tell me, Professor, what's the chance that random static in a period of 6 minutes would fit? If you go down these facts, the time span is appropriate. The impulse patterns are unique. They correspond with the gunshots we did in Dealey Plaza. They match a moving microphone at approximately 11 miles an hour. 3 shots match the depository. 2 shots match the Z film. I'll show you in a minute a photograph of the microphone on the mic in the place where he has to be. We didn't know that he was there. The acoustic said he should be there. If he's not, we're in trouble. We looked and he was there. Those Harley-Davidson motorcycle had windshields in the front. And depending on where the motorbike was and where the gun was, the windshield was either in front of the gun or behind the gun. And it distorted the sound accordingly. The distortion based on the windshield shows up in the waveforms. You have to have on this static an in wave, a supersonic wave at the front for Oswald shots, because Oswald fired a supersonic rifle. But if you understand the cone down from the depository, it would not necessarily show up on them all. The presence of the in wave is appropriate. It is consistent with Governor Conley's testimony. It is consistent with the trajectory analysis and is corroborated by the other witnesses. This is McLean coming up this street, and I want you to notice, contrary to what the good professor from UCLA indicated, there's no crowd in the way here. And I'll show you the film in a minute. He is not obstructed at any time. This is McLean turning the corner. Which corner, Bob? This is the corner of, this is Maine coming this way, and this is Houston coming this way. This is this corner right here.
Back there where the crowd is, you mean, on Main.
There is no crowd in here, Jim, that interferes with this. Wait till you get around it and you'll see it. Here is McLean in the appropriate place in the plaza based on the film. And here is good old H.B. McLean in our hearings. What am I going to do about his testimony? Like many of the witnesses who lived through this 6 seconds, their memory is bad, their perception was bad, and their testimony is bad. Go to the physical evidence first. Make sure it coheres, then go to the other testimony. What I'd like to do for you now is call on this jury to make up its own mind. Don't just take my word for it. When you hear something, you hear it with your eyes. When you see something, you hear it with your ears. The mind puts it together. Studies of eyes show that you don't see peripherally. The mind reconstructs that. In point of fact, you see a small point out in front. The rest is constructed by your mind. What I'm asking you to do is you be a witness to those tragic 6 seconds in Dallas. I want to play for you a tape that is a composite. I will take you up the Houston, around up Main, around Houston, around on Elm, and we have sunk the sounds of the assassination on the film in the appropriate places. Don't misunderstand me. These are not the sounds recorded in 1963. You can't recover those. What Jim did with you is a cheap law professor trick. That's a third-generation tape. It's an unfiltered tape. You've got to exclude the motorcycle background to it before you can get it up to the point it was audible. If he had played you the audible tape, you can in fact distinguish it and hear it. What he's played is an unfiltered tape. It's a third generation. I didn't make a motion to exclude it. The judge would have excluded it as not the best evidence, but I didn't want to interrupt him. I wanted to be polite. What I now want to do is let you be the judge. Dave, would you play the tape? This is up the street. Notice the absence of crowd in here. Cop standing there prohibiting it. The car moving around, not slowing down, going 10 miles an hour. You be the witness. Don't listen to the law professor. This is the turning. Now we go into Zapruder and listen. Would you stop it, Dave, please? Do you see how difficult it is to listen and watch and try to remember it? Let me give you, as witnesses, an opportunity that none of the witnesses there had the opportunity to do. Let's play it again. Back it up, Dave. Stop it, go forward. You can get a chance to see the tantalizing question, can you see Oswald here? Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Your Honor.
Professor Liebler can respond briefly.
I want you to notice, first of all, that Professor Blakey addressed basically the timing question, and then some additional questions, but he never addressed the question of the sounds of the motorcycle and the sounds, first the sound of the crowd coming down Main Street. It's quite agreed there was no crowd on Houston Street, but the motorcycle had been running for 2 minutes down Main Street before it turned that corner. And we listened to the tape, and there isn't a single crowd sound on that tape. And the engine is running at a speed that is entirely inconsistent with a motorcycle moving as it did from 2 to 4 miles an hour and stopping several times as it came down Main Street before it turned the corner onto Houston Street and then onto Elm Street. The other point is that there's no explanation of the siren sounds, and there's no explanation of the fact I have a transcript here that was made by Sheriff Bowles of the sounds on the tape, and he didn't use a third-generation tape, that appeared on the tape during the time that McLean was speeding to Parkland Hospital. And what he reports is he hears the motorcycle engine slowed to idle speed, motorcycle engine at very slow idle, motorcycle slowed to idle. The House Committee and their acoustic experts could have done a voice print or a sound print of McLean's motorcycle and compared it to the motorcycle on this tape. They didn't do it. In the face of all the evidence there was in this tape that it was the wrong motorcycle in the wrong place, it wasn't until 3 years later that Blakey suggested that they address this question.
Did the NSF panel do
just
one,
a minute.
Jim? Wait a second. No, let's
A minute.
be
No,
fair.
no,
Did the
no,
NSF panel do it?
no. But I'd be glad to join with you in asking somebody to do it.
I
How's
would
that?
too.
Okay, fine. Now, please be polite, Bob. There's one other thing that I want. Bob suggests the relationship between the sound, the Zapruder tape, and the impulse patterns cannot be random. Of course it's not random. The Ballistics Acoustics Committee pointed out that when you look at the waveforms during this period of time, the acoustics experts picked out waveforms that were much less pronounced, much smaller than other similar ones on the tape, and did not tell us why they picked out the less pronounced waveforms as opposed to the more pronounced waveforms. But of course, one possibility is that they were guided by the knowledge of what the Zapruder film showed. That's always a possibility, and I suggest that. There's one other thing.
Is it possible that they were honest people doing the best
I
they could?
understand that. So am I an honest person, Bob. How can we disagree? I don't
You just
understand
haven't
it.
talked to me long enough.
Let him, I'll let you respond in about 1 minute. Go ahead.
When he played the sound of the shots, and I wanted to mention this, I have this written up, but I didn't have time to do it. I hope you noticed how close the first two shots were together. 1.57 seconds between his first shot and his second shot.
1.66.
1.57 in my book, but I won't quibble. The FBI said the rifle could not be fired in less than 2.3 seconds. But Blakey's coherence has now got it down to 1.66 or 1.57 seconds. The House committee hired a group of experts to go out in the Virginia woods here to see how fast they could fire the rifle, and not one of them could hit anything or even fire it in 1.66 seconds. Bob Blakey is apparently, and Cornwall, somebody else, I don't know who these people were, but I understand that one of them, my friend Bob over here, was able to get off a shot in less than 1.57 or 1.66 seconds by point aiming. The difference between the FBI 2.3 and the faster shot that some other people got off is that the FBI used the scope and the other people used the iron sights. But nobody could get off a shot at this rapid speed of 1.57 or 1.66 seconds unless they just point aim. That is, they just shot in the general direction. If you think that the rifle was fired that quickly and that the sounds in this tape are consistent with a motorcycle that was in the motorcade, which is simply impossible, then I guess you have to accept Professor Blakey's story. But I, as a farm boy, listened to that motorcycle first time I heard it, and I laughed out loud. It's a little flathead, three-wheel traffic scooter is what it is, that was on its way back from a job to cut off cross traffic on the motorcade route to the Trade Mart, where the Dallas Police Department had a motor pool for all of the motorcycles and scooters that were doing this job.
All right,
And Sheriff Bowles would testify here today that it was not McLean's motorcycle who had the open microphone.
Professor Blakey, like to just wrap it up, please, quickly.
Let me,
That was not part of the agreement.
I know, but I'm going to give him a couple seconds.
since he's introduced me as a witness, it's appropriate that I not only have a cross-examination, but a direct.
Well, you can testify as well, Bob. That's all. I don't care.
What happened is the acoustics obviously present a timing problem. If the Warren Commission on 2.25 is correct, then the acoustics is wrong. Incidentally, if the acoustics is right on 1.66 seconds, and it's impossible to fire within that range, it may be that we're wrong on the single bullet theory, too, and there are two shooters, or i.e. two gunmen from behind. That's another possibility that Jim didn't entertain. So we recognize that the 1.66 seconds presented a real problem for us if we wanted to buy the single bullet theory. We went out and did test studies. And this is a classic study in dealing with people. We got some guys from the local PD. They were all marksmen. They went out and we reconstructed on the DC firing range 3 targets, and we said, don't use the scope. Try for speed, not accuracy. See how many you can get off, and also hit them. But we're worried about speed, not accuracy. I've never seen a bunch of more macho guys in my life. Every single one of them wanted to guarantee he hit the 3 targets. They went for accuracy, not speed. And Cornwall and I criticized them for it, and I said, look, we're not going to tell anybody that you missed a target. And they were macho. I will not miss a target. Whereupon Cornwall and I, who used rifles when we were in high school, he used rifles currently, took the guns away from them, and we had a limited amount of ammunition, so we had no other choice. And I proceeded to go for speed, not accuracy, and did it in 1.66 2 seconds and hit 1 out of 3. And I'll tell you, I've used rifles all my life. That's not impossible. And if I had the opportunity to work with it, I could do it regularly. And so could Gary. That's the testimony. Second comment is just as follows. Understand what's at issue. If the scenario of the NSF panel is correct, the 3 shots, the 4 shots, they're gone. If the corroboration that we've given you between the film and the tape, between the eyewitnesses and the tape, between the autopsy and the tape, for 3 of the shots are correct, it's true for the 4th as well. What he never answered is the chance that random static would have produced such coordination between the film and the tape. I suggest to you it requires a degree of credibility in excess of this that this jury ought to have to not believe the scenario of the acoustics. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Dr. Blakey.
We want to thank all of the people who participated in this program. You can imagine that they've come from a great distance. They've spent a lot of time preparing for this. You've seen some things here, I think, that have occurred for the first time in a public forum. We've given you an opportunity, I think, to see what is the state of the art in the preparation and presentation of demonstrative and forensic evidence in a trial-type setting, both in terms of lawyers giving opening and closing type remarks and with respect to the examination of witnesses. So again, and Judge, I certainly want to thank you for giving up your time today to be here, and you've certainly added a big dimension to it, and a special word of thanks to Dave Muir and the people at FTI for all of their help. So again, we want to thank you for your attention, and we hope you've enjoyed it.
Have the cross-examination of Mr. Liebler.
All right. I want to start with the question of the head movement that you just testified about, Dr. Weck. You testified that at frames 312 and 313, when the it was a Zapruder film. Would you clear the screen, please? Of the Zapruder film, that the president's head and body moved sharply to the, rear. Is that correct?
It's right after 313.
It moved sharply to the rear. You can answer that question yes or no, Dr. Weck. You can answer that question yes or no. At frame 313, you testify at frame 313, and at frame 313, that when the president was struck with a bullet, that the head and body moved sharply backwards.
Well, it's 314 because 313 is a crimson burst that obscures actual definitive interpretation. I would say 314.
Would you put, so you can't say, is your testimony that you can't tell where the head moved at frame 313?
I can't testify about that abrupt movement from 313 alone. That's my testimony.
Like exhibit number 22. Exhibit number 22 is a chart showing the movement of the president's head and body at or about and after Zapruder frame 313. And according to the representation on this chart, when the line moves to the right, as you look at it, that's an indication of a forward movement. And when the line moves to the left, that's an indication of a backward movement of the president's head and body. Zapruder frame 313 is right here, where the pointer is. And we see, according to this chart here, that there's a sharp but very brief, it's not as sharp as the later movement, but there is a forward movement, brief forward movement of the president's head immediately after the time that he was struck by the bullet at frame 312 and frame 313. And you see that from the exhibit up there, Dr. Weck?
I see the curved line, yes.
Well, the testimony is the stipulation that that is what this chart shows, so I'll assume that that's what it shows, whether you agree with me that it shows that or not. It shows a sharp but brief movement forward immediately after the time the president was shot, and then a much larger movement backwards. Do you have some explanation for how why the president's head moved forward immediately at the time it was struck?
I'm not familiar with this kind of a study. I really don't know who did this and what that period of time is for that movement of the line depicting supposedly the movement of the president to the right, what that period of time is.
Well, it's 1 or 2 frames right in there. You can see it, 1, 2 frames of the president's head moved forward, and then it's going to move backwards.
2 frames is what you're saying?
I think that's what it looks like, yeah, about
2 frames,
3 frames at the most.
1/9 of a second. No, I have no explanation for that, but it doesn't alter my opinion in terms of the very strong and much more prolonged movement backward.
So you have no explanation for why, if this chart is correct, which we stipulate here that that's the counsel, I believe that it is correct, as to why the president's head moves forward for a very brief period of time before it started to move backwards.
No
Let me ask you
further-
this, Dr. Wecht. Would it be do you have any idea how much momentum would be imparted to the president's head the time it was struck by the
Well, you use
bullet from a man like Carcano?
the basic formula of force equaling 1/2 mass times velocity squared, and you take the mass of the bullet and the velocity of the bullet, and that'll give you the force.
18.4 pound-feet approximately. I represent that as being accurate. We accept that. Does it sound right?
If I don't want to argue. If that's been accepted by counsel, then fine.
If, in fact, the bullet imparted a momentum of 18.4 pound-feet to the president's head, do you have any idea how much net velocity that would impart to the president's head in the direction of the bullet? Since the momentum here is conserved, not going to lose any. If the bullet hits the president in the back of the head, if it did that, it would impart a certain momentum to it, and that would impart, in turn, a sort of a net velocity to the president's head.
Yes, velocity would be imparted to his head. I agree.
Yes. Would you accept the proposition that if this bullet struck at the speed that it was moving at when it hit the president's head, that it would produce a net velocity in the direction of the bullet of 1.2 feet per second in the head in the direction of the bullet travels?
I won't accept that unless, again, it's something that everybody has stipulated to.
We have stipulated that if Mr. Larry Sturtevant, a physical scientist, an expert on this from the Aberdeen Proving Ground Vulnerability Laboratory, were present, he would testify precisely as I have just indicated.
No, I won't stipulate to that, Mr. Liebler. I'm aware of Mr. Sturtevant's role. I'm also aware of his affiliation with the federal government, and until
Dr. Wecht,
unless
I'm not
such time...
asking you to stipulate to this. I'm telling you that there is a stipulation that if Mr. Sturtevant was here, he would so testify.
Oh, that he would
That's
testify.
all you have to know,
Yes.
okay?
All right, then I'll use the word accept. I'm sorry, rather than stipulate. And I will not accept the unquestioned, unchallenged testimony of a federal person in this investigation unless and until such time as similar experiments have been performed by people who have no affiliation with the federal government.
All right, let me say again, Dr. Wecht, I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm just telling you that that would be the testimony if Mr. Sturtevant was here. Are you in a position to suggest that the testimony is wrong? On the merits? On the numbers that I've given you here?
I thought I was just saying that I'm not in a position to accept
No,
or
I didn't
reject.
ask you that. The question is,
Well, I don't
do
know
you
what you're
have any
asking me then.
basis on which to challenge these numbers?
I just told you the basis. The basis is Mr. Sturtevant's affiliation with the federal government. That's my basis.
Would you put Exhibit 128 on the screen, please? We have on the screen, can you zero? Yes, well, let me read. This is the testimony that Mr. Sturtevant would give if he was here, and testimony that he gave before the House committee on this question. He first indicates in paragraph 1 that the bullet that struck the president in the back of the head deposited about 18.4 pound-feet of momentum upon impact. In paragraph 2, that produced a net velocity of 1.2 feet per second in the head in the direction of the bullet's travel. and that explains the movement to the right, the movement forward that we saw in the head right immediately following frames 313 in the Zapruder film that we saw in the last exhibit. Quoting Sturtevant, paragraph 3, this velocity of 1.2 feet per second is not the kind of velocity that would throw the president bodily around backwards, forwards, or in any other direction, no matter which direction the bullet came from. The deposit of momentum from the bullet is not sufficient to cause any dramatic movement in any direction. It would have a very slight movement. Assuming the bullet hit him in the back of the head, he would have a slight movement toward the front, which would very rapidly be damped by the connection of the neck with the body. In other words, the head would begin to move, and then the body would be dragged forward with it at a much lower velocity, certainly not a very large velocity, not throwing anybody anywhere. And in the last paragraph, paragraph 4, the president's backward motion is a neuromuscular reaction. Nerves can be stimulated by mechanical means. The bullet striking the president's skull caused mechanical stimulation of the motor nerves of the president. And since all motor nerves were stimulated at the same time, then every muscle in the body would be activated at the same time. Now, in an arm, for instance, this would have activated the biceps muscle, but it would also have activated the triceps muscle, which, being more powerful, would have straightened the arm out. The muscles in the back of the trunk are much stronger than the abdominals, and therefore the body would arch backwards. Now, concerning the head movement, you testified as to three different...
We moved to strike that.
All right.
Question.
I'm sorry?
Is there a question after that statement? What the
I'm reading the evidence that
other
the...
expert
yes.
said? All right.
Did you ever read Mr. Sturtevant's testimony before the House committee?
Yes, I've read it.
So you're familiar with the fact that he gave this testimony?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. White. In testifying on the reason why you thought there was a shot from the front, you gave three reasons. One is the head movement, and the other related to X-rays. And I want to read the following from your testimony that you gave before the House committee, and I'll ask you if you gave this testimony. Question by Mr. Purdy. Dr. Wecht, what evidence is there which supports the possibility that there was a shot from the side or from the front lower right rear? Dr. Wecht, very meager, and the possibility based on the existing evidence is extremely remote. There is a small piece of some material that is present at the base of the external scalp, just above the hairline, which has never been commented on before except by me, following the 1972 investigation of the material at the archives and later commented upon by other forensic pathology panel, by the forensic pathology panel. There is a total deformation of the right side of the cranial vault with extensive fractures of the calvarium. Did you come to that conclusion by examining the X-rays, Dr. Wecht?
X-rays and pictures that were made available, yes.
Yes or no? You examined the X-rays. The X-rays would show that.
X-rays and pictures, yes.
The X-rays would show that by themselves, would they not?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Wecht. Has there been any change in the X-rays since that time?
There have been serious questions raised, yes, as I've already indicated, about the authenticity of the X-rays.
The X-rays have been altered as well as the photographs.
Some of the photographs and X-rays, yes, have been.
So the X-rays themselves, would you tell us which X-rays have been altered?
The X-rays of the cranial vault are not consistent with the descriptions given by the various physicians at Parkland Hospital, Shaw, McClellan, Perry, Crenshaw, Kemp, Clark, and others, nor indeed by Humes and Boswell on the night of the autopsy.
Well, Dr. Wecht, my question was what evidence you have that the X-rays were altered. You told me that they're inconsistent with somebody's testimony.
Oh, I've told you.
That does not suggest that the X-rays were altered.
The X-rays?
Yes, the X-rays, or the X-rays, Look at the x-ray. Show me some internal evidence in the x-ray. It's been altered. That's the question.
I'll answer your question, Mr. Liebler.
No.
If court is still in session next week, then we will have the entire presentation made by Mr. Tom Wilson that will show you exactly, with scientific precision, that they have been altered. That's the evidence.
But so far, there's no evidence that we know of that the x-rays have been altered.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen, how long the trial is going to go on.
Well, as of today, Dr. Weck, the question is there any evidence suggesting the x-rays have been altered? I'm not asking what's going to happen next week. As of now.
Yes, there is evidence. It exists, and it exists in the form of other evidence that has been set forth by other people who have also conducted investigative studies, and which is set forth in their published works. I refer you to Mr. Harrison Livingston's high treason. I refer you to work that has been done by other people in the Texas area, by photographic work done by other people, as well as the work that has been done by Mr. Tom Wilson. This work is extant as we sit here today.
This is physical evidence that the x-rays have been altered?
Yes, it sure is physical evidence.
All right, fine. So the third point was that the x-rays have been altered. Of course, if the x-rays have been altered since the time you gave your testimony, then we'll have to leave that question. I want to call Dr. Bodden on redirect to deal with that question. All right, I want to go next to the question of the condition of the bullet. 399 goes to the single bullet theory. And I wanted to ask you first if the bullet 399 could have entered the president's back and exited his throat without suffering any more deformation than was shown in the picture of the bullet we had up before. You can put 107 on the screen if you would, please. It shows the bullet. This is 399. Could that bullet have gone through the president's, entered the back and exited the throat without being deformed any more than that?
Could it have? The answer is yes.
Yes. Could it have gone through Governor Connolly's chest alone and suffered no more deformation than shown in this exhibit?
No.
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 Give me the book back.
Not destroying 10 centimeters of the rib.
You gave testimony before the House committee, and you were asked by Mr. Cornwell, I'll read the question. Let's again use the hypothetical of just going through the governor's chest. Could it have gone through the chest alone, nothing else, and suffered no more deformation, in your opinion, than 399? You answered, you mean after emerging from the president's neck? Tell me, and Cornwell said, either way or both. If the hypothetical varies, tell me both ways. Dr. Weck, I do not believe it could have gone through Governor Connolly's chest because the horizontal and vertical trajectories would not have permitted the course of the bullet, that course for the bullet, which I'm not addressing now, of course. I'm only addressing the condition of the bullet. We'll come back to the question of trajectories. And Mr. Cornwell said, I'm not talking about trajectories. I'm just talking about if a bullet went through the chest alone. Dr. Weck, in a hypothetical situation, Mr. Cornwell, yes, sir. Dr. Weck, doing what we believe the bullet did in President Kennedy's upper chest and the neck area, and then doing what we know the bullet to have done in Governor John Connolly's chest. Is that your question? Mr. Cornwell, let's assume the trajectory is lined up for purposes of discussion. Dr. Weck, the answer is, it gets back to what Mr. Purdy asked me. The answer is, I think, it would be possible for a bullet to have emerged with a relatively minimal degree of deformity, having gone through these two parts of the human anatomy of two human beings, being those two parts being the president's back and exiting his neck and going through Governor Connolly's chest. Now, are you going to change your testimony from what you gave then?
Yes, that's correct. Based upon the two experiments that have been done since that time, that I became aware of by Professor Nichols and by Mr. Howard, and by further studies, that's correct. I do not believe that it would have been possible. And the government's refusal to repeat the experiment through animal cadavers is indeed indirectly confirmatory for me.
Dr. Weck, I want to ask you just to do me a favor. When I ask you a question, try to answer the question.
I am answering your
And
questions.
not give me a lecture on something else. I just
I'm
asked
not giving you a lecture, Mr. Lieber. I'm not in your
ask you-
classroom either,
I
Mr.
didn't- I
Lieber.
didn't ask
I'm
you-
not a law student
All
now,
right,
okay?
counsel.
And you're not a professor.
Counsel and Mr.
Well, we'll bring the
Dr.
judge into
Weck.
this in a moment.
Counsel, Dr. Weck, let's just stick to the questions and answer, not debate with each other. It doesn't help the evidence in the case.
Do you think that 399 could have inflicted the wound to Governor Connolly's side that it did without suffering any deformity? Any more deformity than is shown on the exhibit that's up there?
To the thigh? Is that your, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your
To
word.
his thigh, yes, to his thigh.
Nothing else, just into the thigh?
That's right. Yes, that's all.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I've got in my hand, I don't know if I can get over there, show it to you, but I've got in my hand a shell. It is a, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That Dr. Bodden will show you. I want it back right away, so just let him look at it. Go and get it. I'm being the professor now, and Dr. Bodden is being my student. You've examined this shell, Dr. Weck?
Yes.
It is a fully copper jacketed shell, is it not?
Yes.
And C399 was also a fully jacketed copper shell, was it not?
Yes.
If I were-
Except that it's base.
Pardon?
Except that it's base.
If I were to drop this bullet on the podium here, you wouldn't expect that it would deform.
No.
Or if I threw it at somebody's bone, let's say in his wrist, or some other part of his anatomy, and threw as hard as I could, and it struck, say, your wrist, you wouldn't expect it to deform.
You mean if
The bullet.
you threw it?
If I threw it.
No.
No. So there's a velocity, and the reason, of course, it wouldn't deform is because it's not going fast enough. Is that right?
Well, yes. It wouldn't.
Yes,
It wouldn't
that's fine.
wouldn't penetrate.
That's right. So there is a velocity below which a bullet thrown at a bone or a wrist, in a wrist, or at anything else, would not deform because it's going too slowly. It has to reach a certain speed before the bullet will deform. Now, you would agree with me, would you not, if I threw the bullet at your wrist and hit you in the wrist, that it wouldn't break your wrist either. It wouldn't fracture the wrist bone in your wrist.
I agree.
Right, so there's a certain speed at which the bullet's going to have to be going before it would fracture the wrist.
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you a hypothetical question. Supposing that we had testimony that a bullet similar to 399 would shatter a wrist bone, a bone like a wrist, at any speed in excess of 700 feet per second. That's the first basis of the hypothetical question. And suppose that we had testimony that a bullet like 399, if traveling nose on straight into this bone, this wrist bone, would not begin to deform until it reached a speed in excess of 1,400 feet per second. That's the second basis of the hypothetical. And we have additional testimony indicating that if the bullet were to hit the wrist bone going sideways, under which more stress would be placed on it, that it would not begin to deform until it reached a speed of 1,000 feet per second. If these three things are true, I'm not asking whether they're true or not, let's just understand that, and I just really want a yes or no answer, if I can possibly get it from this question. If these three propositions are true, that the wrist will shatter when a bullet hits it at any speed of over 700 feet per second, and that the bullet will not begin to deform unless it's moving in excess of 1,000 to 1,400 feet per second, then there would be a gap, would there not, Dr. Weck, between which, or in which, the bullet striking the wrist could fracture the wrist and not deform, would there not? Yes or no, Doctor?
Well,
all you have to do is subtract.
No,
Yes or no?
no, but you haven't. In fact, you haven't talked about bone.
Pardon?
You haven't talked about bone. You just talked about the wrist.
No.
I don't know
Wrist
whether you
bone.
mean...
The wrist bone will
Well, you
fracture
said
at
the
700
wrist.
feet per second.
So you're talking about through the bone, or fracturing the bone.
Right.
Well, under your hypothetical,
answer is yes.
that's right, using those numbers.
The answer is yes. Now, you have reviewed, Dr. Wecht, you've already testified that you reviewed, I'd like Exhibit 127, please, that you have read Mr. Sturdivant's testimony before the House Committee, and it's shown on the board here, and Mr. Sturdivant testified at that time, did he not, that a bullet like 399 is 4 times stronger than a human bone, that striking bone nose on, a bullet will begin to deform at about 1,400 feet per second as speed rises, and sideways it will deform down to about 1,000 feet per second, that the in number 8, that the bullet would fracture a wrist bone at any speed above 700 feet per second. And additionally, Mr. Sturdivant estimated the speeds at which the bullet was moving when it hit Governor Connolly's wrist. He testified it was moving at 2,000 feet per second when it left the muzzle. That when it hit the president, after it exits from the president's throat, it slowed down about 100 feet per second. That when it went through Governor Connolly's chest, it slowed down about 400 feet per second. So he estimated its velocity at somewhere between 1,100 and 1,300 feet per second when it exited Governor Connolly's chest. You're aware of that testimony, are you not, Dr. Wecht?
You've lost
Yes
me
or
with
no?
the math. Wait, 100 and
Read the
400,
testimony.
100 and 400 is 500. Subtracting 500 from 2,000 is 1,500. You took it down to 1,100.
The question is, are you aware of the fact that Mr. Sturdivant gave the testimony I just referred to?
I don't care about
yes
his
or no?
testimony. I'm talking about math. You asked me before, can I not subtract?
No,
So
the
I'm showing
question
you I
does
can
not
subtract.
involve arithmetic. It involves the question of whether you are aware of the fact that he gave this testimony. Yes or no?
Am I aware that the testimony? Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Wecht.
Yeah. I'm also aware that he's
Thank
never
you,
done an
Dr.
autopsy
Wecht.
in his life.
All right.
I need the trajectory file over there. Yeah. Exhibit 110, please. You testified earlier, Dr. Wecht, did you not, that this reflected the movement of the bullet across the car, the presidential limousine?
Yes, as a possibility. As to what might have happened to the bullet.
How did you come to the conclusion that this is the the way the bullet went?
Objection, Your Honor. He has twice mischaracterized this witness's view of this exhibit.
All right. I'll also state that he testified it's a possibility. You can ask him why he thinks it's a possibility. He didn't testify that's definitively where the bullet went.
How did you come to the conclusion that this is one possible way that the bullet moved, Dr. Wecht?
It shows Kennedy, Connolly, even moves Connolly in a little bit toward the left side, further in than I believe he really was, as depicted on the Zapruder film. And then we've got a line coming through Kennedy's back and out the midline of his neck, and the bullet then could have moved in such a fashion as to have missed Connolly completely.
I understand, but how did you come to the conclusion that this could have happened? I mean, did you look at the Zapruder film? What did you look at? I understand what the thing shows. How did you come to the conclusion? Did you draw that?
No, that's not my drawing.
You believe that drawing is correct?
It's reasonably correct. It's not, I don't think it's precise down to the literal degree, but I think it's reasonably accurate.
I'm not going to hold you to that. I just want you to know how you came to the conclusion that this exhibit shows a possibility as to what happened to the bullet.
I don't know who prepared that, but I've seen it for many years.
How did you come to the conclusion that it shows a possibility?
Because it's a straight line, and bullets
Could it
move
have
in
gone
a
in any
straight line.
direction at all?
Pardon me?
Dr. Wecht, did you look at the Zapruder film in deciding that this was a possibility?
Yeah, yes. Correlating
What
the
else did you look
Zapruder
at?
film with this, yes.
What else did you look at?
hospital records, the sketches, the autopsy report, the limousine, all of these things.
Okay, fine. You're aware of the fact that that the House committee established a photographic evidence panel, are you not?
Yes.
And they studied this question of the trajectory and the movement of the shots?
Yes.
And you know what conclusions they came to?
Not specifically or not in detail.
Put Exhibit 116 on the screen, please. The report of the House committee, by way of background to this exhibit, Dr. Weck, indicates that they had analyzed, this is on page 18 of volume 6 of the House committee, to which we stipulated, that they analyzed the Zapruder frames in 3 dimensions as stereo pairs between certain Zapruder 187 and 193, so that it looked as though you give depth perception to it. If you do the stereoscopy pairs, it's just like looking at them through the eye. If a single frame of film is a one dimension, putting 2 of these together, you can make it look as though it has depth perception. And after analyzing the Zapruder film on that basis, and by using some of the other films that showed the motorcade from the other side, the Croft and Betzner films, and doing a photogrammetric analysis, they came up with this picture. This is what the House photographic panel portrays as the positions of Governor Connally right here and President Kennedy. Governor Connally is turned to his right at this point, and looking back presumably after he heard the first shot, and the House committee concluded that that was an accurate representation of the location of President Kennedy and Governor Connally in the automobile. Are you aware of that?
Am I aware of what, sir?
That the House committee came to the conclusion that that diagram right there is an accurate representation of the location of President Kennedy and President Connally in the car.
That was their conclusion? Yes. Yes.
You know what the vote of the photographic panel was on that question?
No, I know something more than the vote. I know what
No,
Mr. Robert
just
Groden...
Yes or no. Just yes or no. Please.
No, Mr.
No.
Robert Groden totally repudiates
Dr.
that.
Weck, Your Honor, would you please try again?
All right, just answer the question.
No, I don't know the
You'll
vote.
get a chance to give rebuttal later.
Yes, I don't know the vote.
Vote was 15-1 that this was an accurate representation of the position of the President and the Governor in the automobile. I'd like you to put, I'm running out of time, so what I'm going to have to do
About 2
is
minutes.
ask you to put Exhibit 14 on the screen.